Hey guys, welcome back. It is Drew here from MechaWorks. Today we are covering 5 things that you really need to consider whenever you are swapping your E30. So grab a beer, sit back, throw those feet up, let's get to it.
Now turn up.
Alright guys, so welcome to my little conversational area here. First thing I want to say is we are not going to be splitting hairs. We're not going to be getting into the weeds, into the blades of grass. We're just going to keep this pretty well rounded, and we're just going to touch each subject and not get into too much detail, because that would make for like a 45-minute video, and I know that we're all busy and we have other things to do even though we're in quarantine. So maybe you guys don't have other stuff to do. But anyway, I want to keep this video, not too long. So the first thing on the list of things that you really need to consider for an E30 project or swap is planning. Planning is so overlooked, and it just baffles me sometimes how people can just buy a bunch of stuff for a project and not realize just what it takes to do that swap. So from my background, what I'm trained in is you have to plan. So if there's A, B, and C, you have to know how to get from A to B to C, and obviously not go from A to B and have no idea how to get to C. So, and I know there's a lot of people out there that say, oh, well, I'll just figure it out as I go. Yeah, that's one way you can do it, but then you wonder why you are thousands of dollars over your budget. And that's how these swaps get out of hand and out of control expensive, and then they never get finished. So to do it as effectively as possible, you need to plan ahead. So what I do a lot of research. I spend weeks reading about one particular swap, and then I make a spreadsheet with the parts that I need, from where I'm getting the parts, how much it's going to cost, and at what stage in the build I'm going to buy it. So obviously you're not going to go buy an engine and then go buy a supercharger for the engine. No, you're going to either make your own mounts or source your own mounts and stuff like that. So it's like kind of like a logical order in how to do things. So obviously you're not going to go buy, a supercharger when you just bought the engine. Kind of superchargers like that crowning jewel moment where that's like the last thing that goes on the car, obviously. So you have to plan ahead. Another thing, and we're going to get into this later, you have a big motor, you need big brakes, you need good suspension, stuff like that. So people don't really think about that, where they want to, their dream build is to make 1,000 horsepower E30 with just the motor and nothing else done to it. So we're going to get into that in a second, later on in the video, but what I'm trying to say is you have to plan. Planning is what leads to unfinished projects, cost overruns, and just being burnt out. And I've seen many of my friends just get completely burnt out. And it sucks. I hate it. I do understand there's this thing called life, and it's very hard to plan with it or around it. And I completely understand that. So, but you just have to keep your options open, and, if you're the guy that wants to spend 5 years building a project, do that. More power to you. There's nothing wrong with taking your time and spending it dollar by dollar. If you're that guy that has $20,000 or $30,000 saved up and just wants to, hammer through the build in 2 weeks, I'm jealous. We all want that. We all want to be able to just buy everything at once and throw it in the car, but unfortunately, most of us don't have access to that kind of funding. So we have to do this dollar by dollar and day by day. And it takes a lot of time, it really does. But what I want to drive home with planning is the 6 P's of planning. Proper planning prevents piss poor performance. Always plan, and you'll get through it. I promise. If not, let me know. So let's move on to the next thing. All right, so we had a little bit of a cold front move through, and it is chilly now. So number 2 on the list is going to be the engine itself. engines are very complex pieces of mechanical art, and they cost a lot of money. Generally, most projects, the engine is about 50% of the budget. The engines are expensive. So without getting into too much detail about things, one of the strategies that you guys can use is go on eBay, go on Craigslist, go on Copart, and see on average how much people are asking for that motor that you're interested in, and get a good idea for that. So obviously, if you paid $10,000 for an S62, you overpaid big time, and there's people out there that fall victim to that all the time. You can steal S62s for dirt cheap if you know exactly where to look. Technically, I got this motor for free because I bought a wrecked E39 M5, got everything out of it that I needed, and then I sold everything else. I parted it out and I made a little, actually I made money off it. I made about another $300 more than what I paid for everything. So it's a good strategy, but it takes time. Don't expect to just sell the car back in 2 days. It's not how it works. It took me like 6 months to part that M5 out. And you have people that literally want something for nothing. They're like, hey, all I got is $20. I know you're asking $100, but that's all I got. You're gonna run into that a lot. So go on Copart, see if you can find a wrecked car and buy it and then part it out and make your money back. Go on eBay, and before you just blindly buy a motor on eBay, get in contact with the seller. That's actually how I came across this engine here. I didn't buy this through Copart. I found it on eBay. I actually got in contact with the seller and wound up to drive all the way down to Florida to get it. Same thing with my S54. I found it on eBay, contacted the seller, explained to him the situation, and he was more than willing to meet up for it. And I drove all the way to Missouri to pick that up. And it was great. So that is a strategy. I just want to tell you guys that. So you have to consider how much the motor costs first, but also consider how much it costs to actually get it into your E30. So let's just say your neighbor has an LS1, right? And he says, hey, I don't need this motor anymore. It's still good, but I don't need it anymore. It's yours. It's free. And you're like, hell yeah, I just scored an LS1 for free. Well, then you go to Sicky's website and you see that it cost almost $10,000 to put that motor in an E30. You're like, holy shit. So that's something that you really have to consider, is how much money does it cost to actually get the engine into the E30. M50s, it's like $200 or $300. It's nothing. So comparatively to the LS1 and all the big V8s, that's nothing. So, but you have to consider things like that. The exhaust is going to cost a lot more and stuff like that. So the more complex the swap is, the more money you're going to spend. It's just how it works. I really want to drive that point home, is a lot of people will buy a motor, and this goes to planning. This goes back to the planning thing. People will buy a motor and then have no idea how to get it in the car, and then are just completely confused why it costs so much and all that, to do it the right way. So guys, remember that when you're selecting your motors. Go out there, do a nice basket market research, and get a nice average, and then see if you could score a deal. They're out there. You just have to be patient. Don't buy the first motor you see. That's just like going to a used car lot. You don't buy the first car that you see, generally. So keep that in mind. Let's move on to the next thing. All right, so before we move on, I just want to cover something right quick. Something to consider: your experience level with actually doing the swap on the engine side. So you have beginner, intermediate, and advanced. Your beginner people who can spin a wrench or turn a screwdriver, and that's about it, buckle up. This stuff gets very expensive if you take it to a shop to have it be done professionally. I've had several friends take their cars to a shop to have them done, and they are in the tens of thousands of dollars area just for the labor. So that's something you guys need to keep in mind. If you have the budget for it, great. The intermediate area is you can fabricate stuff yourself, but it's not the greatest, but it works. For me personally, I actually do a lot of measuring, and I have a really cool network of people that I talk to company-wise that make me custom parts. There's a lot of measuring involved, a lot of waiting, but for me it's significantly more cost effective to do it that way. I get the parts in, I throw it on the engine, and we're good to go. Or I throw it on the car, and we're good to go. And then you have your advanced people who can literally make something out of nothing when it comes to metal, and I think that's great. So if you can do that, if you're a master fabricator, then more power to you. The world is at your fingertips. So let's move on to the next subject now. All right, guys, number 3 on the list, kind of like number 2, but I consider it to be separate, is the cost of maintenance and the cost of operating your motor, your engine for your swap. So remember our story about the LS1 from your neighbor. So your neighbor gives you an LS1, and let's say he says, hey, it just needs a head gasket. So you go down to AutoZone and or O'Reilly or Napa or Advanced Auto, whatever your local parts store is, and you say, hey, I need an LS1 head gasket for bank 2, and they hand it to you and say, okay, $50. Do you know how much a head gasket is for that thing? They're like $200 for one, and you have to wait a couple days to get it. And good luck getting to it. The S62 is a very complex motor and is not easy to change a head gasket on. Now, head gaskets on these engines are very rare to go, but what I'm trying to get at is the ease of accessibility in parts and the cost of those parts and the ease of working on these engines. So you're at a track with your LS1 E30 that you built, and you blow a head gasket or something, and you go to your parts store. They say, here's your head gasket for $50. You go back to the track, you spend 30 minutes, and you're back on the track. With this thing, if that blows a head gasket, you're going home. Why? Because nobody in the area is going to have a head gasket for this thing, and then it's going to take you hours to change it. So you really have to pick your poison wisely. I really like the LS1 engine. I really do. It's very easy to work on, and it's very easy to make power with. But I wanted to go the BMW route and went with the S62. But that's something that you really have to consider, is how much money does it cost to maintain this motor. Like oil changes for this motor are well above what an LS1 would be. This is just as a side-by-side comparison, not just, this is with every engine. So, your M50 oil swaps may cost you, $50, $60. This oil change on this engine, since I run nothing but BMW OEM 10W60 through it, and the oil filter and all that stuff is, like $130. So it's a little bit more. But that's something that you guys really have to think about. An alternator for an LS1 is like $80. An alternator for this thing is like $600. And it's stuff like that. So really, really, really think about that before you make your decision. Most of us that use OEM BMW motors, we all know that ECS is probably the best place to go. They have very reasonable lead time on parts and reasonable cost. Now that they own like 80% of the BMW market, it's the go-to for BMW parts nowadays. So guys, that's something you really have to think about. How much money is it going to cost me to fix this when it breaks? How easy is it to work on, and how quickly can I get those parts? Let's move on to the next topic. All right, guys, number 4 on the list. So, you want to go fast, right? Big motor, big horsepower. Well, guess what else you need? Big brakes. So, this here is a front caliper to an E82 135i. This is actually going to be the calipers used on the S62 build, and the reason for that being, number 1, nobody's done it before, and number 2, I want some big brakes because I want to be able to stop. So, with that being said, is you want a high horsepower car, you need some high power brakes. There's a lot of options out there when it comes to braking for an E30. I ran the factory Girling calipers on my white car, which is the S54 car. I ordered my parts for my big brakes for my E46 M3 stuff to go on the car. Well, I still had the original brakes on there with the S54, and they were fine around town, but as soon as you open that car up with what that S54 can do, very quickly I was reminded of how overpowered these brakes are. So, and that was running a manual booster, or a booster delete with manual brakes, and I could smell them burning up pretty quickly, and my brake temperature was very, very hot. So that is something you guys really need to consider when building a big motor like this, or planning on going forced induction. You need the bigger brakes. I'm not going to get into the details of all the braking options out there, but there is, as each year goes by, there's significantly more and more braking options for the E30s. I just happen to pick this route again because nobody's done it before, and I want to be the first. And I really want to see what these 135i brakes can do, because even in the 135i itself, they are very, very big brakes, and it could stop those cars, and they're very quick cars. So that's something that you guys really need to consider, is brakes, and that is part of planning. Brakes don't have to be the first thing you buy. They don't have to be the last thing you buy, but just keep in mind that they do need to be on the list, and keep an eye out there for more and more options. Check this video out here. I just did this video. It's the 5-lug swap on the S54 car on how I did my brakes and did the 5-lug in general. So check that video out, and you can get some information on how I did my 5-lug swap, which is the non-traditional route. So go check that out. Let's move on to the next item. All right, guys, number 5, suspension. Suspension is also an overlooked item because people just want to stuff the engine in the car and go. And yeah, there are some engines where, some instances where you can get away with that, such as like an M50 swap. You can, ride around on factory E30 suspension. We all know that our E30s, at the youngest, they're like 30 years old. So chances are the suspension needs to be replaced. If you put in a larger motor, like one of the bigger straight sixes, chances are that motor is going to find all the weak points on the suspension, and you're going to have to replace it anyway. As you can see here on these shots, I actually have the S62 car completely stripped down from suspension, everything, so I can work on it outside of the car and then bolt it up later. So first thing is bushings. I use Revshift bushings because I prefer them. There are other brands, but I prefer Revshift, and as you can see, I just happen to be wearing the shirt. Thanks, John, for sending this to me. But all of my bushings are provided by Revshift, and I have 0 complaints. Never had any problems with them. The only hard part about doing the bushings is getting the old ones out, old factory ones. So the front control arm bushings can be a little bit of a pain in the ass, and the rear subframe bushings are a total pain in the ass. And but actually putting the poly bushings in there, so easy. They just slip right in there and you're good to go. Makes the car feel great. Does not make the car feel like it is riding on bricks and does not make the car feel like it's on solid aluminum mounts, which is very, very uncomfortable. I've ridden in several E30s with solid mounts and it sucks. Definitely not a streetable car, racetrack only. My next thing is for you guys that like your nice low cars, coilovers. Let me show you what I'm using. I'm using custom ground control coilovers. These are ground controls. Totally upside down. Almost smacked the camera, did you see that? So I'm using custom ground control coilovers. These have an E36 bottom end and an E30 camber plate up top, and these shocks are specifically valved in the front for the weight of that S62, and I cannot wait to feel what they ride like. Coilovers are just a go-to thing. Please don't cheap out on them. Yeah, you can get lowering springs, but when it comes to, engine swaps, just get coilovers. When I got into the whole E30 thing, I did what every, beginner E30 guy does, and I got Racelands Raceland or Rocker, yeah, it's Raceland coilovers. Do not get JOMs or JOMs. Get Racelands before you get JOMs. I can speak from experience on that. And they ride okay, but as soon as you stuff a bigger motor in there, like my S54, that S54 overpowered that suspension like crazy. The car bounced a lot more. It handled like a pig. I didn't like it. And so I have K-Sport Customs on there right now, and it rides significantly better, but they are significantly more expensive. Coilovers can range anywhere between $500 and $600 for an okay set. My custom ground controls were like $3,500, so you know, you pay for what you get. I think eventually on the S54 car I'll switch over to ground controls at some point, but you're going to want the suspension to be able to handle the power. Mine are valved to handle this engine. The rears are valved to also handle the squat of the torque of this engine. So a lot of research has went into that, but coilovers and suspension in general are very commonly overlooked. And if you pull the engine out, you might as well tear everything else out and just redo it all as one time and be done with it. So, but like I said, I use Revshift bushings on everything, 0 complaints, and I hope these ground controls are worth every penny that I paid for them because they were very expensive. So, yeah. Alright guys, that just about sums it up for this video. I really hope I provided some insight for you guys and some different thoughts and different methods of doing things for your swap builds, and I really like doing videos like this. And if you like me doing videos like this, please let me know down in the comments, and you know, like this video and definitely subscribe for more videos. I'm gonna have a lot more of these coming out. If you want to sponsor anything on here and you want to put your parts on my car and I can put your name all over everywhere, please let me know. I'd really love to do that. I really appreciate all the help that I can get, because we all know that these are not very cheap. None of this is cheap. So if you guys are going to take away anything out of this video, I really want to say don't cheap out on things. Just go ahead and spend the money on the nicer stuff first, and you'll save yourself a lot more time and money and effort in the long run. So with that being said, guys, I want to say stay safe out there. Hope you guys aren't too bored being quarantined, and remember to do awesome, be awesome, and stay awesome. You guys are great. I'll see you next time.